Hey guys, welcome back to Flatpak Effects. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this map animation that I got from the Wall Street Journal. Now, I picked out this particular animation because there's a few things that I want to cover in this video, namely the map animation, the line animation, and the titles as well. There's also a few extra effects that I added in, so if you just want to learn how to do those, you can skip to that part of the video. The first thing that you'll need is some screenshots of the area or the map that you're going to be using. Now for me, I've sourced these maps from Bing Maps. You can also use Google Maps. Now you can use any of these map providers for your own personal projects. For this part, I'm using the Suez Canal. And what I'm going to do is start by creating a new composition here. And this one I can just call my map. I'm going to set this to be 1920 by 1080. You can set the frame rate to be whatever, duration around 10 seconds. And then we can drag in our map here. And we're just going to scale it down. Now what I did in my original one was, because I took quite a wide screenshot, I can see the entire thing. If I zoom in, obviously we lose that quality. So I also went ahead and just took some closer screenshots here of the areas that you know, if you want to zoom into a specific part, you can just take closer screenshots. And then all you need to do is basically just overlay this over your map. So this is a really simple way of retaining the quality of, you know, an area that you want to zoom into. So you can essentially just sort of scale this up and just kind of put it over the top of the area that you want to go or zoom into. So that's pretty close there, and then just scale up the opacity so we have that area sitting over our map. Now I can adjust the position and everything a bit later, and what I'm going to do is also make these 3D, because we're going to control these using a 3D camera. Now it's important that you don't move these now, because you don't need to. What we're going to do is create that 3D camera, and I can set this to be 35mm, and using the camera tools, which I'm hitting C on my keyboard, I can now move around my map, and those are going to be stuck on top of each other. So the other advantage here is that if I zoom into a section here, the quality is going to be retained. Now I can see that when I turn this off, you can see how it's a lot sharper, and that's because we have that closer screenshot. So if you're zooming right in, just keep overlaying sections that are higher and higher resolution, and you can zoom right in without losing that quality. So that's the first part, is just basically getting the map and the detail right. The next part is we're going to create these little pop-up boxes here with these titles. Now the way that I did this was I created a new composition. I can just call this one title and just hit OK. And what I'm going to do is just come up here with my rectangle tool. I want to set the fill to be none. And I can change the color to be white, or whatever color that you want to use on your video. And then you can also scale up the thickness. You can adjust all this later, so you don't need to worry too much about this. Now once we've got that, what I'm going to do is just come down to the content settings, go into the rectangle path, and here you can control the size of it. If I do a little scale keyframe here, or a size keyframe, I can set this to be 0, and that's how we kind of get that animation of it popping up like that. I can just make these easy ease, and we sort of get that animation playing out like this. So that's what we want for the little box. Then what I'm going to do is, basically at that point, I'm just going to draw a line which sort of goes out like this, and you can also adjust the thickness to kind of match that line. And for this one, what I'm going to do is add a trims path. Now the trims path is how we animate that line basically from the end to, or the start to the end. So I'm going to create a little keyframe here and then animate that out. So we kind of get this line popping up like this and then animating out like so. Now, if you want to learn more about all these different techniques and even these map animations, you can also check out my Animation Master course. even if you've never used After Effects before, I walk you through all the basics of how to use After Effects to create all these different types of really cool animations that you would see from Wall Street Journal, Vox, all of these different providers online. I teach you a lot of the core foundational techniques that you'll need in order to create a lot of these effects and animations yourself. So it's not just about learning how to replicate something, it's about learning the techniques so that you can go out and create your own animations. You can take that information and build upon it in your own animations. The idea is the only thing that should be lacking is your creativity or the ideas that you can come up with. So I try to give you all of the steps necessary and the tools so that you can create all of these really cool and interesting animations. If you enjoy making these sort of animations or you want to make more of these, then definitely check out my Animation Master course. There'll be a link down in the description below. You can also check out a lot of the testimonials. I've got tons of student testimonials of people going through who have never used After Effects before, right through to creating some really cool looking animations and effects. So coming back to this, what we're going to do next is create a little box here. So this one, I'm going to have a solid color. I don't want any stroke. And I'm just going to create a box that sort of goes out like this. And then I'm just going to select my text tool here. Just click here and just type out some text. So I'm just going to select this, sort of position it here. Now I can come over here to the text settings and just scale this up. If yours is not there, you can also come down and make sure the character settings are selected, and you can also use the character settings if you're using an older version of After Effects. This is the font that I'm using down here if you want to follow along exactly. And then we can just adjust this rectangle by coming into the scale settings and disconnecting that little line. It allows us to basically move the end of this line. So what we want is we want this to kind of animate from this point. So create a little scale keyframe there, and then another one here, and drag this one back down to 0. So that's just moving the side of the box and not scaling the whole box up and down. You need to make sure it's linked to those two properties. And the other thing that we're going to do is, if I just turn off that background, we want the text to only appear inside that box. So if we go down to the track max settings, what I'm going to do is go to select my shape layer and then turn that background layer back on. So it'll just reveal the text as it's moving like that. The other thing that I want to do is parent that shape layer to that text layer so that when I move my text around, we're also moving that layer as well. I can also make this easy ease. So we kind of have this animation sort of playing out like this. Now what I want is once it gets to here, I'm just going to duplicate it, drag this one on top, move it across. I'm basically going to hit P on the keyboard, create a position property here, and then move this layer up so that we get that movement. So as that line's coming in, we're getting the movement up. And then I can also adjust the position of this one like this. And now I can basically change this text layer here. And if I hit S, I can bring up those scale properties of the second line and scale this back. So now we have these two lines appearing. What I can also do is if I take that top shape layer, I can change the fill color to something else. I can make this darker, and I can also select that text, change the color to be white. And now we have that little animation sort of playing out like that. So that's how we create the little title animation. Now the beauty of this is once we've got one animation and I just drag it into my main composition, make it 3D, I can scale this down here, reposition it, and if we play through, we'll see that text basically pop up. And now we can start doing a bit of an animation here. So I'm just going to bring up my camera tool here, create a point of interest and a position keyframe. Start by zooming the camera in here. I'm just hitting C on the keyboard to sort of move my camera around. Then I'm going to do a very sort of slight pullback here. Something like this. I could also make these easy ease. Maybe drag this out a little bit on my timeline. And then when I get to about here, what I'm going to do is basically start to zoom the camera out further so that I kind of get a big picture of what's going on my screen. Now what I want to happen is, at the moment the text layer is sort of positioned or stuck. You know, it's not scaling with the camera. So an easy way we can fix this is just by creating some simple scale keyframes and essentially scaling this up. Now what you'll notice is it won't scale where that box is set. So what you need to do is you need to position by hitting Y on the keyboard, reset that anchor point to be in the middle of that box. So it's really important they're using the pan behind tool, which is Y on the keyboard. And now it's scaling based around that center point there. Now the beauty of this is I can move this wherever and it doesn't make any difference. It will just follow wherever that point is. So we're kind of getting that text moving with that animation. Then when I kind of zoom out here, maybe animate it out. Make all of these easy ease. And the other thing is with the camera tool, also come down to the keyframe interpolation, set the temporal interpolation to be continuous Bezier. That just smooths out all of the lines essentially in the speed graph, smooths out all of the lines once we start creating a more movement here on the camera. So we kind of have this line sort of moving like this. So that's how I kind of created the text with the over the top of the map. The other part was I created a line here. I just made sure I didn't have any fill. You can set this to be sort of yellow. Now what I find is if you just create a line here, then set this to be 3D, you can then adjust the line and sort of animate this however you need. Scale up the stroke width, something like that, and that'll be stuck to our map. Now what you can also do is, and under the stroke settings, animate the stroke width. So as it's basically the camera zooming out, line up with these keyframes. You can just hit U to make this easier to bring up those keyframes. Animate the thickness of this line. Now the other thing is the text is over the top, so we can just drag this underneath our title. And what you may also need to do is the title is over that line now. You may also need to hit P and adjust the Z position over the top just very slightly. If you're getting, you know, if you drag it underneath and it's still not sitting over the top, just to drag that Z position to adjust it. But that's basically all I did there to create that line. And then I can animate that using the exact same properties that we did before. Just minimize this, come down to that shape layer and then add a trims path. And you can essentially just animate this. Something like this. So the other part of this is now I want to create another title. Well, the beauty of this, if I come up to my title and come up to edit and then duplicate that, we end up with another title in its own composition. If I go back to my map and drag this title in on top, make it 3D, I can now scale this one down and position this wherever I need it. You will also need to come up to your pan behind tool or hitting Y on the keyboard, position this one in the center, and then all you need to do is just drag this one across so that we sort of get this second line animation, something like that. And once we kind of get to this point, what I'm also going to do, create 2 more keyframes here. And then I want the camera to sort of zoom in here. So I'm going through my through my camera tools here. And I'm sort of zooming back in there. And I want this title then to sort of scale. So I'm going to create a scale keyframe at that point. And as the camera scales in, what I want is this then to sort of follow that. Also bring up the properties for that and just slightly move that back. Make these easy ease for those keyframes so we sort of get that animation. You can just adjust this to be wherever you need it to be. And that's pretty much how we create this little animation here. The other thing that I also did in my original, if I go back to my original layer, was you'll notice here that as the camera zooms in, I've added a bit of rotation. So what I did to do that was I created some rotation here, which is the Z rotation. So as the camera then zooms in, I had a little bit of Z rotation. And to make my titles follow that automatically, what you can also do with them is come down to the Z rotation. And if I hold Option or Alt on my keyboard and click on the little stopwatch, then drag this pick whip to that Z rotation of my camera and click away, it will automatically adjust that layer to follow whatever my camera is doing. So as my camera turns, it will also turn that layer, which is really cool because it automatically updates as we're animating that camera. So that's really cool little feature that you can also add in. Now again, because these are all in templates, I can just come in here and change the text to be whatever. And when I go back, it automatically updates that text for that box that I'm essentially editing. So you can go through and edit however you like. And that's the great thing of creating these little pre-composed compositions. You can just keep editing them however you like, and it's going to automatically update on the timeline. So that's pretty much the main part of the animation. Going back to my original composition, I want to show you a few extra little things that I added in just for effect. Now, the first thing that I added was I turned on motion blur by hitting this button here and then turning on motion blur for all of those layers. It adds that nice little motion blur effect. You can see if I turn that on and off, it really just adds that next level to all your animations. So I definitely recommend turning that on. The other thing that I added was a texture effect to my map. So this is kind of gives it this little interesting texture. You don't have to add this on, but to do this, what I did was I added the CC plastic. Now you can come up here with that layer selected, search for CC plastic, and then just add it on here. These are the settings that I use. Now all this does is creates this little texture effect which sort of sits over the top. So if I zoom in here, you can see that I've just added this texture effect. It's just something to kind of give that map a little bit more depth. You don't have to add that on, but that's how I did it. And these are the exact settings that I used here if you want to follow along with what I've done, but you can just kind of mess around with those settings there to get that look. The other thing that I also added on here was I added these lines which sort of animated in here just to sort of, you know, you might want to add this on if you're trying to highlight a set area. Now you can do this quite simply by creating, if I go over to this map so we can see what we're working with, I essentially want to isolate this section. So what I'm going to do is duplicate this, and I'm going to come up to Effect, down to Keying, and I'm going to add the key light, and then just select the ocean here. And you'll have to turn off that background layer because you've duplicated it, but you're trying to isolate that area. Because it's blue, we can do this. And that's all you need to do. Now, if you just turn off that layer, and now what we do is we create a new stroke line, which sort of goes like this. And then if I come down here, what I can actually do is add a repeater. And if I drag up on the copies and then off center this, I can also come into the transform properties adjust the width here, we sort of create these lines which go like that. Now, I go through this technique in a lot more detail for highlighting countries and all these sort of things and combining these effects. I cover all of this in my Animation Master course and show you how to do this in a lot more detail. But these are the basic sort of steps that you can use to do this. Once you've got that, then what you want to do is basically isolate it to that area. So what I'm going to do is select this and set it to follow that layer that we essentially isolated, but I want to invert it. So now you kind of get where we're going with this. We've inverted it and now it's stuck to that layer. I'll need to make this 3D so that it also follows that layer. And you'll need to just also scale this down, reposition it here. And there you go, that's how you kind of isolate it to that specific area. You can only do this if you have where it's like a very distinctive color, otherwise you have to draw a mask. I go through these in a lot more steps in my Animation Master course, but these are the sort of steps that I used here to create these lines. Then I just came up here and changed the color to be like a blue to sort of match to that and added a slight fade effect as we zoom in. It just sort of makes it a lot more interesting and you can highlight certain areas as well. So we covered quite a few different techniques in that, hopefully picked up a few tips and tricks along the way. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. You can check out more videos over here on the side of screen. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.